All right, it is after 6 o'clock, and we are going to start the Transportation Commission on February 17th, 2022. We'll start with the information about how to communicate and roll call, correct?
Certainly, let me take roll call first. Commissioner Salcido,
Aye, or here.
Commissioner German,
Here.
Commissioner Ash,
Here.
Chair Milks,
Here.
and Vice Chair Cagle is not here tonight. I do, of course, note that this is a special meeting, so it wasn't something already on our calendar, and she has a work conflict, so I would say that's an excused absence. Moving on to the next item that you asked for with regard to public comment. So public comment, of course, is possible in person here in the meeting, but via Zoom. When the chair calls for public comment, we ask that members of the public press the raise hand button in Zoom, or they can dial *9 if they are connecting via phone. Also, it is possible, of course, to raise to raise your hand or press *9 during the staff presentation, so that you don't have to hurry to do it when comment or in public comment is asked for. We will, of course, monitor that and bring people in at the appropriate time to provide said comment.
Excellent, thank you. We'll move on to our second agenda item, which is public communications. This portion of the
Recording in progress.
This portion of the meeting is reserved for comment on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission cannot act on items raised during the public communications, but may respond briefly to the statements made and questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. And as always, with any public communications, there is a 3-minute time limit. So we'll open it up to public communications.
And this would be the time for anybody on Zoom wishing to provide comment to press the raise hand button or dial *9 if connecting by phone. And Mr. Chair, I see there is nobody requesting to provide comment.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to item number 3, consent calendar, approval of minutes from November 18th, 2021, which is our last meeting. Do we have any comments or corrections for the meeting minutes? Would anybody like to move to approve them?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and do we do a quick
Roll call vote.
roll call
yes.
with that?
Commissioner Salcido,
Aye.
Commissioner German,
Aye.
Commissioner Ash,
Aye.
Chair Milks,
Aye.
motion carries.
All right, moving right along to item number 4 on our agenda. We have consideration of the Neighborhood Streets Program Update number 3. This is a review of the most recent neighborhood meetings and the action items from those meetings. So we'll have presentation from staff, questions from commission, then we'll open it up for public comments before we bring it back to the final comments from our commissioners.
Is it weird for me to see? Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for joining the special meeting. My name is Matt Redman, Associate Transportation Engineer here, and I'll be co-presenting with Brianna Byrne, also Associate Transportation Engineer here at the City of Walnut Creek. Let's see if this works. Next. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about the Neighborhood Streets Program, which I've presented on here before, but we're kind of figuring out more about the program as we deploy it, and so we're kind of updating you as we do more and learn more about the program and develop it, essentially. So tonight we'll talk about, why we have this program. And then we'll talk about some of our active neighborhood engagement meetings that we've been doing with various neighborhoods, including those listed: Homestead, Walnut Boulevard north of YVR, Rancho San Miguel on San Carlos Drive, as well as on 2nd Avenue up in the north part of town. And then I'll cover the update on our traffic calming toolbox and what that looks like and what we're doing there. You can see on the map, that's approximately where these neighborhoods and locations are. So why do we have the Neighborhood Streets program? Well, it's really to improve the quality of life of residents. We've been informed about a lot of speeding requests from residents, as well as from PD. Generally, speeding trends are up in the traffic engineering field because of, well, COVID kind of changed things for us with less cars on the streets and more people at home, more awareness of speeding. And speeding's very important considering this graphic here, common one shown, showing at 20 miles an hour, not too dangerous to probability-wise to be impacted by a car. But as you get, just 20 miles above that at 40 miles an hour, you have a huge increase of potential fatality. So speeding is very important, and we believe it is directly correlated to quality of life. So here's a graphic showing some of our requests, the number of requests throughout the last decade or so. And you can see requests about speeding has severely increased with the blue in 2020 and still high in 2021. So you can see that this is a big concern for our residents. And so that's what the Neighborhood Streets program trying to address. So we've kind of developed a mission statement here for the Neighborhood Streets program, and that includes addressing traffic safety and speeding on residential streets. So we are primarily focused on the neighborhood residential streets. It provides a clear and direct communication between staff and residents, and overall trying to improve that quality of life for Walnut Creek residents. We also have more information on the website there at the bottom. So to talk to the clear and direct communication, so to facilitate this, we've had neighborhood meetings. Before they were in person, but with COVID, we went to Zoom also, and it's been great. I think residents have a good opportunity to join and participate that way from their homes. And so we're able to conduct these meetings, and at the first meeting, the goal really is just listen and learn about the different objectives or the different issues that might be going on in a neighborhood, really kind of gather all that information. The second meeting is when we come back and we try to propose some actual solutions. And the third meeting is when we develop concept plans and actually try to get those implemented, and maybe in just like a pilot phase. So right now we're between meetings 2 and 3 in a couple neighborhoods, and that's what we're going to be updating you on tonight. To get the word out about these meetings, we post on our social media channels like Nextdoor. We have these flyers here with QR codes to the Zoom link and all that. And we put those on the telephone poles in the neighborhood. And then we also have an ever-growing email address list of different residents so that we can make sure that they know about the meeting that way. So with these meetings, we are trying to, in the different neighborhoods, we're trying to take a data-driven approach. So we're looking at different characteristics that would elevate the need to address each neighborhood. So for example, we've come up with these badges in this presentation to kind of show the different data points that we're looking at in the different neighborhoods. So for example, police feedback, that could be just internal communications with PD, letting us know about a certain issue or a certain street. Vehicle volumes is just, we have traffic counts, and so we can verify that those might be a little high for that designated street. We also have speed data. We have radar feedback signs on the street that collect data. There could be a speed trailer. And then we also have speed surveys that are counted, or we could actually go out there with our Speed Watchers program and collect data with residents. We also have resident requests, so if we know it's an issue, they let us know. And if that's a high number, then we may need to take a deeper look. And then we also can consider proximity to schools and parks and that kind of thing. So for these solutions, we kind of have a two-faceted approach. So we believe that for the solution to be effective, it needs to take a both behavioral and an engineering-based solution. So we've talked about behavioral-based solutions before. And tonight we'll be talking a bit more about engineering-based solutions. But to recap, the behavior-based solutions are the infamous Pace Car Pledge program. So this essentially is a pledge to drive the speed limit, follow the rules of the road, and then you get a badge to display on your car and let people know that you participate in the program and you drive and are respectful of others on the roadway. And then we also have our yard signs. These are available for free. We have multiple designs, including the Beware Deer Are Near, thanks to the Girl Scouts. So then next, let's dive into some of the neighborhoods. So the first neighborhood is Homestead here. So that segment is along Walnut Boulevard down to Homestead Ave, and then the segment of Homestead Ave. So PD reached out to us about Homestead Ave speeding and see if we can try to make some treatments there. We've also heard resident requests about implementing some sort of treatment. And then we've had neighborhood meetings, 2 of them now, and we've had over 40 residents attend those. Great participation, followed by awesome participation in our behavioral-based solutions. So it's great to see that interaction and follow through. So there's some of the badges. We also have some radar signs on these streets so we can collect some data that way. So on the left, you'll see a word cloud of the different issues that were brought up in the first meeting. So you can see a lot of those issues that the residents bring up. And then on the right, we came back with these proposed solutions in the second meeting. Now you'll notice, so we have traffic circles, bulb outs, narrowing, and speed humps. Now you'll notice these are more of like a temporary installation. So we are looking to pilot something like these on these residential streets. And now what's nice is that we have the before data. So we, as I mentioned, we have this before data. So we can essentially see when we implement this if they're effective. And that way we're not deploying stuff and not following up if it's actually effective treatments to slow speeds down. So we have some preliminary high-level concept plans, and residents might go crazy for seeing stuff like this, but don't worry, nothing here is final. So here on Walnut Boulevard, just looking at the different constraints we have, it's pretty narrow, but it's possible to maybe squeeze in a small, tiny little roundabout or traffic circle. Maybe do some narrowing treatments along there as well. And then the segment below, south of Sierra, to install some speed humps. Now, speed humps essentially has a little asterisk there with the fire truck because emergency vehicle response times do need to be considered when installing speed humps, and then they also need high participation rate from the residents. There are a lot of side effects, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then for Homestead Ave, there's kind of 2 treatments, so one without speed humps, and then the next one will be with speed humps. So there's some narrowing treatments, possibly some bulb outs, and then a traffic circle to kind of tighten things up and try to encourage cars to slow down. And then if we look with speed humps, spacing these about every 300 feet, trying to really make an impact on driver behavior to slow down. Again, the fire truck for additional consideration. So here's the side effects. So these are just a couple, but just to know that, whenever you do something, there's going to be trade-offs. And so the first kind of effect would be diversion. So here's Homestead Ave, and if you imagine, a big resistance like speed humps on there, people may try to cut around them and find an alternate path like water does. So we have to consider that, obviously working with the residents so that they know the impacts. And then these are pilots, so we can always undo them. Emergency vehicle response times I mentioned, large vehicle access, so if we make a bulb out, making sure that large vehicle turns are still possible. Items like speed humps, they do have noise impacts from braking, acceleration, as well as possible shocks going over it, so that's another consideration. And then with some of the bulb outs, and you could imagine the areas where the street sweeper are not able to sweep, we could have maintenance and neighborhood participation buy-in so that we can keep those areas maintained when city staff is not able to reach them with their trucks to clean them. So those side effects go for all the treatments that we'll be talking about tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Brianna here, and she's going to talk about Walnut Boulevard North.
Thanks, Matt. So I've been working with Walnut Boulevard North, and the area we're specifically looking at, Matt had mentioned Walnut Boulevard south of Ignacio, so this is to the north with the limits south of the Seven Hills Ranch Road. The issues we're going into this program knowing the inability to walk safely through the neighborhood, in addition to the proximity to the middle school. Through speed data and a study we had conducted, we know volumes on this road, and then there's also the buy-in or the feedback we've received from the residents. In 2018, the city contracted the traffic consultants of Fair and Piers to conduct the Walnut Boulevard Traffic Calming Evaluation Study. The study reviewed conditions between 2017 and 2019. They collected the speeds and daily volumes. This is partly where we're getting our data from. And then as part of that study, they provided traffic calming recommendations for the corridor. So on the left of the screen here, you'll see what's called optical speed bars. And these are low-cost implementations that were proposed for the areas around the curves. And on the right, you'll see more of a long-term infrastructure recommendation to install a neighborhood traffic circle. So this isn't really anything that we're looking to do at this stage. We're looking to implement something like this, but on a pilot level. So in order to address the issue with connectivity, we walked the residents through the meeting. You know, what are the complexities with installing a connected path on either side of the roadway? On the north half, it was the east side that was identified the location with the least complex issues to solve. And then right just north of the middle school, it was any improvements were going to take some kind of more substantial work. And so we have not identified which side, but it's something that the staff is working on. During our meeting, like I mentioned, we are discussing these pilot level improvements with something that's easily replaced. You can see here there's just a little barricade in the middle of the intersection, as well as a curb to delineate the existing path. We are hoping to do a pop-up demonstration of this before the next council meeting to kind of get feedback and adjust any plans moving forward. And on the north side of our study segment, we have extra pavement, and this is the bridge that crosses Walnut Creek. With this extra pavement, we can do something as simple as striping a walkway for pedestrians. And then, like Matt had mentioned, we are looking at speed humps with buy-in from fire department. If the two locations of these neighborhood traffic circles work, then we're looking at 5 potential locations of speed humps. This may go up if any of these traffic circles don't work, as we need to adjust the placement of the speed humps to create a successful traffic calming. And then moving on to the Rancho San Miguel neighborhood, specifically San Carlos Drive. So the view here is at a crosswalk. We received speed data, resident requests, as well as this is very close to a park with trail access. So this is the pop-up demonstration that we had done some time ago, and the installation of this is coming soon, within maybe the next couple of weeks to a month. So you'll see here that to address the speeds around this curve, we kind of pushed the lanes outward and therefore improving the sightlines to the crosswalk. We extended the bike facilities through this curve, as well as will install a bulb out on the north side to shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians. And with that, passing it back to Matt.
Okay, so our fourth and final neighborhood is up on 2nd Avenue. So we've met with Second Avenue and had various meetings, learning about their issues that they have. And so in this segment along Second Ave from Larkey Lane all the way to North Main, there is a discontinuation of sidewalks. And so there is a canal trail at the Larkey Lane Second Ave area that would connect potentially to these sidewalks. So we are looking to add like a walking path. So I've marked up some essential options with what this would look like. So you can see there's some roadway. It would essentially be a roadway stripe, similar to what Brianna showed on the bridge at Walnut Ave or Walnut Boulevard. So we do have to deal with some different utility conflicts, as well as some parking removal and stuff. But in general, the residents seem very positive to add this feature to the south side of their street. And based on the existing constraints in the street, we may have to narrow it down, which may have some positive side effects of slowing speeds down. But this is kind of what we're looking at for there. In the green on the bottom, you can see the sidewalks, and so you can see large gaps missing. And so then wrapping up here, so on the traffic calming toolbox, so there are lots of different elements of traffic calming that you can install on a street. And so we wanted to kind of combine these into a single place to fully understand what data you would look at to determine if each is effective. And kind of build that out. So you kind of have these disjumbled number of treatments, and so we want to kind of bring them into one house on a website. So this would be a public website using non-technical language for anyone to learn about and read. And since this is Walnut Creek, we would have information about Walnut Creek specific information or considerations that you would use when implementing that. It also cover pilot versus long-term implementation of each of these and list the pros and cons, of course, and considering those side effects that we talked about. So that's kind of what's ahead, that's in progress, so that everyone's aware of these different elements. And that's all. I'll leave it with the take action and sign a pace card pledge and display a yawn sign. Also attend neighborhood meetings, and if you have questions or comments, you can reach out to myself or Brianna with our emails here. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. We'll bring it to the commission first for questions, and then open it up to public comments from the public, and then bring it back for comments, final comments from the commission. And as I understand, this is a presentation that we're not voting on or anything like that, just informational purposes. So, does anybody have any comments first? Questions first from the commission?
Questions, bear with ours. Great program, supported, but I'm only familiar with the RSM1. Did you reach out to the entire neighborhood, or do people come to you?
So the question was, do we reach out to residents or do residents come to us?
Yes.
Mainly residents reach out to us.
So what happens if other residents object to the changes?
Yeah, so actually through our lawn sign program, this is like a very visible program that the city has. And at least for the Walnut Boulevard North, we've expanded our email list just because people want yard signs. People want like this kind of program in their neighborhood. So that's one way that we're reaching out and expanding our outreach. And at least for this pop-up demonstration, that's also a great way to get any neighbors that aren't aware of what's happening involved. And at least for speed humps, we'd send out mailers.
Okay.
Was looking for a clarification on the identification of the pilot projects. So it looked like it was primarily driven by resident complaints and maybe a little bit of information from the police department. I don't know if there was additional data in terms of car pedestrian accidents or things like that that helped to select these sites, and if we know that these are the locations where we most need help in Walnut Creek, or if that's still something that needs further investigation.
Yeah, definitely something that can always be looked into more. There's a lot of streets. I will say that the police probably know it pretty well, especially the motor officers that patrol. And so when they give us additional feedback that corresponds with the residents, that's always good. The other element is the speed surveys. So whenever you post a speed limit, you have a speed survey behind that. And so having that data can show physically, what the average speed is, essentially. And so trying to bring that down is kind of a goal there. So
do
another
we
element.
actually do like a thorough speed survey of all streets in the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
I also note Sminar Boardman, our city traffic engineer, she's attending via Zoom. She's raised her hand, even though she's listed, I've got her in as a panelist here, but I'm guessing she wants to provide some additional answer. There she is.
Sure, yeah. So I just wanted to add to that. Thanks, Matt. That was good. So as a follow-on, yes, a lot of the work that we've done so far has been motivated by requests that we've received. We do have request data from the past decade plus, just even digitally. And so we do have a tendency to know where these hotspots lie from a speeding quality of life approach. As it relates to collision data, we're actually working on getting the local road safety plan started. And so that's going to primarily be based on crash data to drive solutions that address traffic safety. And that's going to be citywide, not just focused on the neighborhood streets that we're talking about in particular.
Thank you. And then one additional question regarding the traffic circles. Is there any impact are there ever any unintended consequences, negative unintended consequences of traffic circles for pedestrian safety or bike safety?
Yeah, I'll take that too. So the traffic circles that we're talking about here, these treatments, they're not true roundabouts. They're really just something that is intended to narrow the roadway and force you to kind of divert a little bit to the right as you move around it, which forces you to slow down. As a bicyclist, you're small enough, and in these locations that we're talking about, we don't have any bike facilities at all. So as a cyclist, you would just take the lane as you're going through it, or you probably wouldn't really need to move at all otherwise. And then as a pedestrian, we're not really necessarily looking at changes. Brianna could probably speak more to any pedestrian facility improvements that we're doing for Walnut Boulevard North. But that is not part of we're not doing a full roundabout design. If you're thinking about, let's say, the Walnut Avenue and Oak Grove roundabout, that's a different kind of treatment than what we're talking about here.
Okay, so if someone were crossing the intersection, it wouldn't take the car into that path of travel for the pedestrian if they're
it wouldn't be
parallel to each other.
Right. Yeah, it wouldn't be any different as a pedestrian. You're not going to experience that intersection any differently with that treatment.
Okay, questions?
Thanks, everyone. So what's the average spend per project, and what's the source of the funding?
Yeah, so the prices kind of vary a little bit. It depends on the type of pilot that we're putting out there. These are really, really low cost solutions, and we have money that's been set aside specifically, which is funded in the capital budget right now through traffic impact fees. And so we have There's a couple of projects which I had taken to you all about a year ago now when we did a TIF, it's kind of a TIF light update where we added these few projects. And so one of them is called traffic calming, citywide traffic calming, and then another one is traffic calming near schools for as part of active transportation improvements around schools. It's about $150,000 that's been allocated for one of those, and I believe it's $100,000 for the other one, and I'd have to double check that. But we were talking about low cost treatments. That's not enough for putting in a true concrete bulb out. And like Matt was stating before, that gives us the opportunity to test some of these solutions and iterate upon them.
Thanks. And how, if there's other neighborhoods that we want to recommend or look at in the future, how do we approach that and get them into the pipeline? Right.
What do you want?
Yeah, Matt, please take this one.
Okay, so we have like basically a list, and then we're trying to figure out the criteria, as we kind of mentioned with the data, to prioritize that list. We have staff here that's limited in resources, and so we can only take on so much, but then as projects get completed, like the Rancho San Miguel, we can eventually add more and keep improving. So the big thing here, though, is on Homestead, for example, since we have all that before data, what if people are requesting this stuff and we're like, hey, we proved that this stuff isn't very effective? Then we have to kind of go back to the drawing board. Maybe different locations are different, but we do have to consider the effectiveness of these treatments. And as we get more data, we can understand how effective they are. So that's kind of the goal with these pilots.
And I wanted to mention in particular one neighborhood, the Woodlands and Citrus Avenue. And Smadar, I know a while ago you were out doing the Safe Schools program on Peach Willow out there in Citrus. But there's a proposed development that is finally starting to make its way through the city, and it'll probably take a couple of years across from the Nob Hill Shopping Center to put in new condos and townhomes on Citrus Circle. But it sits at the entrance to that neighborhood. And there will be public fees coming in from that developer. And I would recommend looking at that as an opportunity at the same time to add that neighborhood into the pile and to start thinking ahead so it's at least on your list so people can start looking at that developer and working with them. That street there is very wide. And I know there's been speeding campaigns in that area. And so if there's things that can be done to at that same time narrow that entranceway into that neighborhood that has over 900 homes and slow that traffic coming in down. That'll also help reduce people coming in from the Shadelands and cutting through to Concord that use that. And so I think it's sort of a good timing to pay attention to that neighborhood. And I'd also look at, as you were talking about the like walkways in on 2nd Avenue. There's, I know in that neighborhood, and it goes for, I think, the Rancho San Miguel neighborhood, is the sidewalks were before the ADA laws, and so they don't have the ramps down. And so if you're in a wheelchair or if you're pushing a baby stroller, it's not so easy without those, like, at the ends of the sidewalks and intersections to go down. Kids on bikes. So I just wanted to add that comment, too.
Thank you.
And if I could ask the commission just a reminder that we haven't had public comment yet. So right now we're just in questions for staff. Then we can move on to comment afterwards.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the commissioners? I do have one question which follows up on something maybe similar was asked before, which is, from the sounds of it, it is it's a great program. I love everything about it, except I do have a question about how these neighborhoods get chosen in terms of, is there a certain demographic maybe that is more invested in stopping people from driving through their streets, who have the time to reach out and organize and call staff? And is it possible that this is not like an equitable way to allocate resources? Basically, are we catering to those particular neighborhoods that can bring up these issues versus those that maybe do need it more? And how can we be equitable in choosing which neighborhoods do get our attention?
Yeah, I don't know if Sminar wants to answer some, but that's definitely a consideration. The program just started when I started basically. And so as we move forward, that's top of mind for how we proceed.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Matt's totally right. We basically had a backlog of interested residents who were trying to get these types of treatments, and we noticed that there was a pattern, which was that they were looking for neighborhood traffic calming. But we've been really, it is top of mind that equity is important, and we know that there are certain neighborhoods that don't necessarily get the opportunity or have the time to even come to night meetings, and so making sure that we're able to reach out to them and reach out to all the neighborhoods within Walnut Creek is how we're going to be moving forward in this program. And so really thinking about how we can allocate resources appropriately so that we can address maybe some of the areas that get a little less attention. We are actually able to kind of track where we've been getting requests from. We do have that pinpointed, and so we have a good sense of where we're missing or where that gap exists. And so we'll probably be making some concerted efforts with those neighborhoods in particular.
Okay, thank you. We will open it up to public comments, and either in person or over Zoom.
Yes, we have a number of attendees via Zoom. And one of them just raised their hand, just to let everybody know, of course, that if you are attending via Zoom, you can press the raise hand button, or if you're connected via phone, dial *9. It looks like we have nobody here in the chamber who's interested in providing public comment, so I'll go ahead, if that's okay. I'm going to bring in Kevin O'Shea. Who, if he will unmute, and here he goes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that as a resident of Walnut Creek that lives on Homestead, we constantly have cars going anywhere from 60 miles an hour, at least 7-8 times a day, and it's a 25-mile-an-hour zone. So for us, it's a real issue. Our dog's already been hit on the street. We have 2 little kids, and so we really are at our wits' end at this point. So it's not an equitable situation. It has to do with safety, and it's really upsetting that was brought up, because at the end of the day, we want our pets, our kids, to be safe, and this is like 2 years in the making. We go do a meeting, we don't hear anything for 6 months. We do another meeting, we don't hear anything. We finally got to this point, and it almost feels like the guy wanted to shut this down. And it's really frustrating as a resident who's trying to get something done to slow the cars down that are speeding every single day, 60 miles an hour in front of our house. Thank you.
And it looks like we do not have anybody else wishing to speak.
Okay, thank you. So we will close public communications for this portion and bring it back to the commission for any final statements.
And if I may first also ask, I wanted to confirm from staff if they are looking for any specific input from the commission tonight.
I don't think I mentioned anything in the staff report, but all ears. I mean, I want to hear suggestions, ideas, especially, about your specific comments about how we can improve that. So,
Any comments from the commission? Sure.
I think staff has done a great job with this program. I think it's using smart, evidence-based design solutions, and you're doing it in a very nimble and cost-effective way to really pilot this and test some things out, which I think is really excellent. And so I'm really happy with what you all have done with limited resources and limited time and a lot of requests from many residents. One thing that I do feel with all of this work is that it really seems to be addressing symptoms of a bigger issue, which is reliance and the design of cities to be focused around vehicular traffic, which is, that's where we are right now. And so I think it's great that we're taking steps to mitigate some of the negative aspects of an environment that is designed around cars. But I definitely, knowing that time and resources are limited and constrained, I think these are great steps. I definitely want to encourage staff to continue to focus on the big picture of ensuring that we have complete streets that are multimodal and conducive to encouraging more people to take their bikes, walk to places, and make it more pleasant for all of the different users, and not just focused on the drivers, which, I'm a driver sometimes, I'm a pedestrian at other times, and I'm a bicyclist at other times. And so I understand the challenges and demands of all the different users, but I'd love to see how we can make Walnut Creek more livable for all of the different people who need to use our streets.
Can I comment? It's a great point, and thank you. When I first got here, that was what I thought, and then I kind of got sucked into the thing. So thanks for bringing me back out and realizing that there's multi-modes. And I think on the Pace Car Pledge, we do have a box there to consider bike or walking for shorter trips, because I think it's like 40% of trips are like less than 3 miles. So, and we have pretty good weather, especially in the winter right now. So, yeah, that's a great point, and yeah, thanks.
Do you have other comments from the commissioners?
So, first of all, I want to follow up on Board Member Salcido's comments. Very much favorable what you're doing. I can only speak about San Carlos because I'm familiar with that issue. Several years ago, we dealt with the same issue there of cars speeding through. What we found was the people who were complaining loudest didn't live anywhere near San Carlos. And I haven't seen any of your advertising material. I live in that neighborhood. So I'd like to see data on who actually lives nearby the problems that you're dealing with.
Can I clarify that you're asking for the data about
Who actually lives there?
in the request?
Yes. Because we dealt with San Carlos and found that nobody actually lived there.
Okay, I haven't dealt it with San Carlos in the early stages as much. I was more in the later stages, but I think Smadar is coming on for my help.
Yeah, we've been speaking for San Carlos, that little section. We've actually spoken with everybody who lives on that block between San Jose and San Juan, I believe is the next street over. So we've been in, and also some folks who live in San Jose Court. So they're very, very local, right next to that crosswalk that we've been looking at.
If you could turn that into data or local residents, that would be helpful.
Just to clarify, Commissioner German, you're asking for data basically matching the, I don't know, for lack of a better term, complainers with where their place of residence is?
All right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And thank you.
Other comments? Nope. I don't have any comments other than thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, we will be moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 4B, Introduction to Traffic Signals, Part 1 of 3, an informal presentation on the various technical aspects of the traffic signals. And I also believe we're not voting or anything on this, just informational.
Even more informal, yeah. This one's just to hang out and learn. This one was back by popular demand because it was canceled last time with the Zoom issue, so. Thanks again, Commissioners. Matt Redmond, Associate Traffic Engineer here. So we're going to talk about some traffic signals. Neighborhood streets isn't all we do here as traffic engineers, so I want to touch on another element of our work, which is traffic signals. And in part one here, I just wanted to kind of go over the very basics about how kind of signals operate and work. I have ideas for what part 2 and 3 could look like to kind of get into more advanced technology, ITS stuff. And then we could propose, basically come to you with more advanced ideas and solutions for addressing traffic in the city. So here we are with part 1. So overall, I'll go over some reference documents that we use and the standards that we use for design. And then I'll talk, specifically I'm talking about the Walnut Creek traffic signals. So I'll go over some of the intersection infrastructure that you'll see out on the street that you're already probably familiar with. And then I'll talk about how we time the yellow, red, and green times, and then the different directions of the phasing. And then I'll mention how pedestrian signal timing's calculated and that kind of thing. And then I'll talk about some various other fun elements. So in general, intersections are where cars come together. And so we have to assign a right-of-way for the different movements. So it provides, traffic signals specifically provide an orderly movement of this traffic, and it helps manage those conflicts. So on the right here, we look at the Caltrans standard plans. Caltrans is a state government body over the roads. And then on the left, we have the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, also known as the CAMUTCD. Especially in part 4 in there, it talks about the traffic signals and how they're operating and how various elements of them are timed. So a lot of the stuff in here is referenced in those. So generally to design a traffic signal, we look at various elements. So engineer will consider the different traffic vehicle volumes or pedestrian volumes or bike volumes and look at the physical characteristics of the existing roadway to determine what's needed. And then with the help of the CAMUTCD, we have warrants to help make these decisions and see if things meet certain thresholds. So that looks at number of vehicles, pedestrians, location, crash history, and that sort of thing. And those are just recommendations, and overall it's about the engineering judgment. So I put on some traffic signal plans here of the build and shows the various design elements. So when there's an intersection, you have other ways to control it. You can do a 4-way stop, or like we have a roundabout, like on Walnut Ave and Oak Grove. So there's other ways to do it, but in general, we're going to be talking about the timing and traffic signals tonight. So Walnut Creek has 100 traffic signals. These are all monitored and maintained by city staff. They're all networked, so we have communication with them here at City Hall out to those. So essentially it has its own little network, which is really nice for remote communications. You can see here a map of the various ones. And at 35 of them, we have video detection cameras, so that's a more advanced way of detecting a vehicle's presence. And then we have 26 pan-tilt zoom CCTV cameras at the intersections. So I'll talk more about some of the video, how detection works and how that impacts the controlling timing in part 2. And then on our large arterials, such as Treat and Ignacio Valley Road, we run a more advanced timing, which uses time-of-day plans, and it coordinates the lights. And so in part 3, I'll mention into coordination and how that operates. So just going over the basics here, when we start with the intersection, here we are at Newell and Main. We have our through movements. We also have our left turns, and we have these have right turn pockets, so we have right turn movements. So that's kind of our general basic movements that you'll see at any intersection. If we go just looking at the view from the street, we have traffic signal poles, and these are various designs, and they have different characteristics of wind speed and foundation depth, and those are all called out in the Caltrans standard plans. And then we also have the mast arms. So mast arms can be different length, and we have a luminaire mast arm up at the top that can attach to. And then we have the vehicle signal heads. We have and then mounted at different points with left turn arrows and such. And then we also have pedestrian infrastructure with the pedestrian signal head and the countdown timer on this one, as well as pedestrian buttons. You've all seen this stuff before. And then we have at every intersection a localized controller with a traffic cabinet. So that would be here. And in the downtown, they're nice, covered with art. So generally, you have kind of two types of cabinets. The Caltrans 332, which is you'll see on the side of the freeway a lot, oftentimes. That's their standard. And then in the city, we more have the NEMA Type P. The one I just showed you is a little smaller version of the NEMA Type P, but our NEMAs are usually covered in green, so they look a little nicer. But those are the cabinets. And then when you open the cabinet, you can see the various equipment. This is actually pretty neat. If you think it's messy, it's very neat. So on the top, we have detectors. In the middle there, we have the controller. That's essentially the computer for the intersection running the various timing protocols. And the rest, I'll leave it to electrical work. Starting off, so some basic timing parameters for the green, yellow, and red. We have a minimum threshold for the green, and that's set based on the bikes. So the California Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices calls this out as 6 seconds plus an additional time for the bicyclist to clear the intersection. So that's based on the distance that the bike travels through the intersection, either a left turn or a through movement. It's calculated that they go about 14 miles per hour after their 6 seconds initial startup. So that's going to be set the minimum green time, and then we go to a max green time, which would be set more based on vehicle volumes. However, that max time may not be used if the vehicle volumes aren't there, and it can, what we call, gap out earlier. And we'll go to that another time. And then there's a yellow time. That's about typically 3 to 6 seconds, and that would depend on the speed of the roadway and different driver behavior characteristics. Following the yellow, we have the red, which clears the intersection, and that's usually a short 1 or 2 second kind of an interval. So next, we'll talk about some phasing. So the phasing here for Maine and Cypress is very simple. It's essentially just a 2-phase intersection. And if we look here, we can see the different signal heads with the different directions. They're all green balls, so there's no left turns protected. They're all just permissive left turns. And if we turn on the intersection, we can see north-south goes along with the left turns as a permissive phase. And then switching to the next phase, it will go east-west. And cycling back around, we have our whole cycle right there. So very simple. Let's move to a little more complicated intersection. Here we are in Ignacio in California, right near BART. And this would be considered an 8-phase signal. So we have our dedicated left turn lanes. Turning it on, we have our first leading left turns, followed by our through movements east-west. And then we have through movements north-south, followed by a lagging left. So you can swap the left turns by leading or lagging depending on what you want to do. Typically, you do that for coordination. And then wrapping back around, we go back to where we started, and that's our full cycle. Things get a little more interesting over at Ignacio and San Carlos. Here, notice the signal heads are a little different. We have some 4-section heads. And what that does is we'll first have our Ignacio Valley Road left turns, followed by our through movements. And then we're going to go all on the southbound approach from San Carlos Drive, out from Heather Farms, essentially. And this essentially splits the phase, so it's called split phasing. And it does have some decreased efficiencies. However, for certain intersections, when the geometry calls for it, we do run this type, and then we'll do the northbound, followed back by the left turn through. So that's our cycle there. Now, a little more complicated, we're going to add another different signal head. So we have the on the north-south, we have a 4-section head, as we just saw, so that's going to be split phasing. And on east-west, we have these, we call them a doghouse, but it's a 5-section head. So here, if we turn it on, we get our protected left turns. Now, we go and we get our through movements, but we get our permissive left turns. And this allows for additional vehicle capacity. When you don't have high volumes on your through movements, you can allow for additional vehicles to get through on your left turns. So it's kind of like a better for operations. And then we have our split phase, southbound only, followed by our northbound only. And wrapping back around for our complete cycle. So now let's introduce this concept of a cycle length. Back to our simple intersection at Main and Cypress. If we have our northbound through, we have a green of 35 seconds, a yellow of 4.5, and a all red of 1.5. That's a total of 41 seconds just for that phase. And then, so there we are. Now we have to run the other phase. So we'll run the 20-second green because maybe it's not as heavy of a street, and a 3-second yellow and a 1-second all red. That's a 24 seconds. And if we combine both of those, we get our 65 seconds of proposed cycle length. Now, this is a small intersection downtown. That could be very typical, about a minute. However, on our bigger arterials, you might double that. And so you might be running a much longer cycle length. It would be very common. All right, moving right along into the pedestrian walk phase. So the walk phase is actually made up of 2 different values. So we have the walk time for the little white signal to show up. So that's about 4 to 10 seconds. This value is context sensitive. So you could imagine near a school where the groups of kids, you may want to give them more time to get started walking. And then we have the flashing don't walk time. And this is calculated with the distance. So you can see on the bottom there, the image about 100 feet across. We would divide that by 3.5 feet per second, which is a speed that the CAMU-TCD calls out for a pedestrian to walk to get across. And then based on those 2 values, you have your total walk time. And that would usually go with your through movement of that intersection. 2 final pedestrian concepts here. So we also have some leading pedestrian intervals. So this is when you give a 3 to 7 second head start for pedestrians to enter into the intersection and give their presence, so that maybe right turning vehicles don't just take over the pedestrian walk time, so that the pedestrians can actually get out. And so we have this at Broadway and Lincoln. There's also exclusive pedestrian phases. So this is called a ped scramble. And you can go diagonally, so you can save a trip and go from a 2-stage to just a single-stage crossing. And essentially it gets its own phase. So you can imagine north-south, and then it would get a ped phase all by itself. So then we have those at Olympic and Locust, as well as Olympic and Main Street. A couple more concepts for general traffic signals. So if you don't have detection at an intersection, which we'll talk about another time, but if you don't know if cars are there, you can put the controller on recall, so you can always place a call on a certain phase. This might be helpful when you have a big main street. You're always just going to recall to that. You can also do this for pedestrians, so you could have a pedestrian recall. This was a very popular request during COVID when everyone didn't want to touch the button, so that we could put ped recalls. And we ended up putting some ped recalls on some of our trail crossings. And then you also could change the vehicle heads to a bike signal head. So that way for bike crossing, you kind of have that extra treatment. We don't have any of these yet, but that's not the final answer on that. Hopefully we'll have some too soon. So another concept is a overlap. So this is like at Broadway and Civic when we have that northbound right turn. Essentially that right turn is overlapping with the through movement going westbound. So they can go at the same time because there's no conflict, and that improves efficiency of the intersection. Now you notice going westbound on Civic, you're going to obviously need a no U-turn sign. That way the right turn does not conflict. So you have to consider all these different movements, but that one would be allowed. And that's why it's always important to follow those no U-turn signs. And then there's also a flashing yellow arrow. We have this up on Geary, and there's also one down on Newell that kind of give you that protected. So you can see the graphic here. It's green, and then yellow, red, but then it starts with a yellow right there, and then it goes to flashing. So it will give you a protected, and then it gives you an improved yield rate at the blinking phase. So it kind of helps with that. And I think that wraps it up. So I appreciate your time for that, and I'll leave it up back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll bring it to questions from the commission, then we'll open it up to questions from the public, and then bring it back to final comments. And we are not voting or anything, but we're still allowed to.
For the intersections where there are lights for pedestrian crossings, is it possible to have because before COVID and before automatically pushing the button each time for pedestrians, at an intersection and I actually am not 100% sure if this is part of your purview, but near Contra Costa Center,
Mm-hmm.
at Treat Boulevard and like Jones Road, I think it is. I would work over there, and I would constantly like just miss the time when I needed to push the pedestrian button, and then I had to wait an entire cycle through. Is it possible to create like a grace period? Because it often would show a walk signal for a while before the countdown would begin, and so there was ample time, but it was always very frustrating when I would just miss hitting
Yeah.
the pedestrian button. I don't know how controllable that is.
Yeah, there is a setting to allow that extra time, but it sounds like since it delays that walk time as much as possible, it is pushing that flashing don't walk to the end of that window. And so usually it does that calculation, can I fit the walk plus the flashing don't walk
Okay.
when you press it in the green time that it has left? And if it can't, are you talking about going north-south on a cross street? Because that's a
Yes.
very long crossing.
Yes.
So you could
It is.
imagine whatever that countdown crosswalk, I mean, imagine it's 30 plus seconds, and that the vehicle volumes north-south are not as high. And so, it's hard to fit it in. In fact, that crosswalk as a pedestrian, you're probably going to extend it longer than any vehicle would, right? So that's why we don't like to put ped recalls on signals when it's going to essentially create a bunch of inefficiencies. It's going to, like the vehicles, there's no vehicles going to be there, and maybe no pedestrians going to be there. So, but yeah, so it will try to fit it in. Generally, the controller tries to fit that value in, and if it can't, it doesn't. But
Okay, so I'm just missing it by too much.
Other questions from the commission? No? Okay, seeing no other questions from the commission, we'll open it up to public comments. I don't see anybody left in the building. Do we have anybody online?
Oh, we actually do have somebody who's raised their hand, and for those who haven't yet raised their hand, I will note that if you would like to provide public comment over Zoom, please press the raise hand button, or if you're connected via phone, dial *9. And I'm going to, we've got Kevin Lapp. I will turn on. If Mr. Lapp would like to unmute his microphone, he can begin speaking.
Hey there, everyone. Matt, great presentation, and appreciate all your guys' efforts with the neighborhood traffic meetings that you guys have been holding for Walnut Boulevard North and South and the other neighborhood streets program areas. I didn't necessarily want to ask this question in that portion of tonight's meeting, but I thought I'd bring it up now. For intersections that have flashing red no right turn arrows, were those added based on warrants, or are those traffic warrants, or are those added based on kind of other means? And then another question is, are there any other tools that you guys have or signs to better prevent cut through traffic? I say this specifically at the Walnut Boulevard Ignacio intersection. I live on the north side.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll go ahead and take that.
Mr. Chair, would it be okay for staff to respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so when we put right turn, no right turn restrictions, they're based on several different factors. It could be because of undesirable side effects of vehicle traffic using a street that may not have been used otherwise just because of congestion elsewhere. And then the other reason would be, especially in our downtown, you see those placed because of high pedestrian volumes. And then the other reason we would put them in is locations where you don't have good sight lines of vehicles that are approaching as you're pulling up to the intersection. If you wanted to try and make a right turn, you can't see vehicles that are coming up to your left. I think that you're trying to speak to the turn restrictions that we have in place at Homestead and at Walnut Boulevard at the Ignacio Valley Road intersections. Those were installed as a result of the 68024 interchange project. and those have been in place since. And those restrictions were placed, based on a study that was associated with that work. And as it relates to cut through traffic, I wanted to make sure that I emphasize that Matt and Brianna's work on the Neighborhood Streets program really focuses on traffic safety as opposed to and calming vehicle speeds as opposed to the quantity of vehicles that use a street. We are not legally allowed to stop vehicles from being able to use a public street unless it's specifically identified in some other kind of way. This is where things get a little tricky, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But the cut through traffic issue, which I know comes as part of the quality of life concern, is a very difficult one to solve, which is why we're trying to solve speeding issues, because that is something that we do think that traffic calming devices can help alleviate that speeding concern. So that is where I will leave it.
Thank you for your input. Do we have any other questions or comments from the public?
No, I just do want to note that Mr. Lapp has re-raised his hand, but he's already had his opportunity to speak. But I would note that if he has any follow-up questions, he can contact staff directly, and they'd be happy to speak with him. I would just like to add actually to staff's presentation. First of all, I have to admit I am a traffic signal geek, big time, and my wife will attest to that as I explain things to her when we're at a red light. She's very patient with me with that and so many other things. But I actually wanted to note, since Commissioner Salcila, you mentioned the signals on Treat near Contra Costa Center, and you noted that that might not actually fall under Mr. Redmond and Walnut Creek staff's purview. Interestingly enough, and that's of course because that's an unincorporated county pocket. Interestingly enough, though, the county actually contracts with the city of Walnut Creek to operate a number of signals in the unincorporated area, particularly along the regional routes such as that, for one, because it makes sense, but for two, and this is also the reason why a number of Caltrans signals at off-ramps are actually operated by the city, is because Walnut Creek has a very good and well-earned reputation of having a very advanced and well-managed traffic signal system. And that actually is something historically the reason for that is because in part, Ignacio Valley Road, our little freeway with traffic signals, as I like to call it, kind of pushed us to the forefront in traffic signal technology very early on. Our former transportation planning manager, John Hall, was able to avail me of stories from his time here, starting in, I think, 1979 or 80, when we were using I would almost call them prototype signal controllers. They were handmade, soldered by some small company, and I think it was in Southern California, and they were so advanced that they tended to overheat during the summertime, and our traffic engineering or public works staff would actually put blocks of ice on top of the signal controller boxes to keep them cool. We, of course, use much more efficient and modern cooling systems today, but we were also really on the forefront of having coordinated signal systems, computerized signal systems. Actually, in our archives have some pictures from the early 80s when the local newspaper came to write an article on that. And there's photographs of, again, Mr. Hall with very long hair, as was, the fashion at the time, or the big hair, I would say. And he's probably cringing right now if he was watching this. I apologize to John on that. But anyway, I just wanted to share that our staff may be modest, but I'd like to actually just put that out there, that it is something that we're well known for. So anyway, thank you for allowing me that.
Do we have any closing comments from the commission regarding this?
I would just add, I know we've had a number of conversations both in here and one-on-one about Ignacio Valley Road and Treat and those corridors, and there is a lot of computer time and staff time and signal technology that's actually out there. And maybe Matt, you guys in your spare time could write like a white paper of what you're doing, because I think you guys are doing a lot, and I know Ignacio is not easy, but you can get I think the people in the city need to know what the effort you guys are putting in, and what are sort of the next steps and how you're paying attention to it. Sort of maybe toot your own horn to how good it actually is, even so when we're all mad at you and stuck at those traffic lights, like, you know, it's something we can all go promote to this community, and you guys should be proud of what you guys are doing down there. And I know it's an effort that will never end, but maybe you could look at a white paper or something.
That's an interesting comment, thanks. And it's one of those things, when it works really well, no one notices, and when it works really bad, everyone notices, so. We do have to be careful about how we advertise it, but yeah, I mean, that's a good idea to.
Just want to thank you for the presentation and the education on traffic signals, and just kind of a plug for what you were mentioning, Jared. I think I learned a lot about sort of some of the history. I didn't know all the history that Andy just went through now, but just some of the how advanced the city is on this area of traffic engineering, and some of that I learned through the Citizens Institute that the city of Walnut Creek does, which is a great program for any citizens out there, or people who work in Walnut Creek. I think they're also invited to participate to learn about what the city does and how we're really on the forefront on a lot of different things. So.
Thank you. I have just one comment, and it's a little bit different tone, which is that in 1967, the city of Davis invented the bike lane signal. And 55 years later, and we still don't have one here. So I would maybe disagree with, we're at the forefront of technology. We just have a different focus. And maybe we could shift that focus a little bit to be more people-centered and less car-centered. Not necessarily talking about this staff, but I just know historically we have invested a lot of time, a lot of money. We've gone after a lot of grants to keep this technology going, and we still have traffic, and we still don't have a lot of people biking and walking, so maybe we try a different technique. But not, again, talking about this staff. Thank you for the presentation. I do enjoy the information you presented. Thank you.
Would it surprise you to hear that one of my senior papers while I was at UC Davis as a planning student was actually on that traffic signal? It included going down to the city's public works department and looking at blueprints.
You should consider putting that as a specialty skill on your LinkedIn profile.
How do you know it's not already? All right, so I believe that wraps up the agenda items. Last thing we have before adjournment is commissioners' announcements and brief reports on activities. Should we start with, do we have any staff?
Certainly,
reports before we
be
go to
happy to. I
commissioners?
have a few things to mention tonight, actually. One, as you may know, well, this will actually well, let me first start, actually. Ozzy Arce was our associate transportation planner, who you probably will remember from his work most recently, at least, with Rethinking Mobility, among a number of efforts. He has parted with the city for a senior transportation planner opportunity with another jurisdiction in the Bay Area. Obviously bittersweet. Ozzy worked for me, and so of course I always support our staff, my team members' professional growth. Hated to see him leave, but like I said, it was a promotional opportunity for him, very well deserved, and just wanted to let you know that you won't be seeing him here on the podium unless we can maybe somehow get him back at some point in time. But I just wanted to note that. Then the second thing I wanted to mention, which will actually serve as a segue to the third thing I want to mention, is that we have a new transportation commissioner who has been selected by the, because we're having a vacancy coming up here, has been selected by the city council, or be appointed by the city council, and that's Rob Reese, is Walnut Creek resident here, longtime work in traffic engineering, actually, and he'll be sworn in on March the 1st. The reason for that, of course, as I mentioned, is, well, we have a vacancy coming up, and that would be Chair Milks here, actually. So typically, when we have, you're terming out, so typically what happens when we have, commissioners moving off of the commission is there's an annual city council commissioners reception, officially recognized. That's been postponed due to COVID, and so I didn't want to let a big length of time go by without recognizing. I was actually able to swipe away from the city clerk the official suitable for hanging plaque, which I will, which camera? There's the camera, there we go. There's a plaque for the city of Walnut Creek and from the city council presented to Danny Milks in appreciation of your service on the Transportation Commission from 2014 to 2022. And I actually have a few things I'd like to mention as I hand that over to you. So Danny, if I may say, first started with the Bicycle Advisory Committee back in 2012. That committee has since been folded in actually to the Transportation Commission, but so we've got 8 years of service here, but 10 years of service in total, including that committee. Chair Milks was appointed to the Transportation Commission in 2014, was elected by his fellow commissioners as chair in 2017, and then, of course, last year. So you're going out on top, so to speak. When I was not the secretary of the Transportation Commission when you first joined the commission, of course, was with the city, just wasn't the chair or the secretary of the commission. So I was looking through some of the history, and I noticed that your very first action at your very first meeting was to cast the sole no vote against a proposal to reduce the cost of monthly parking passes in the city's downtown parking garages. And in your comments, you noted that the reason for that was that it would be an incentive for people to drive, and that there was no similar incentive or no incentive otherwise to instead try to get people to walk or bike to downtown. I don't of course want to say one way or the other about who was right, who was wrong, but I definitely a consistent voice in that manner. And over the course of the 8 years that Chair Milks was on this commission, really had his hand in a number of efforts, including the pedestrian master plan that was ultimately adopted in 2016, several capital budgets to actually implement and build stuff throughout the city. We usually do those on a yearly basis. Had input on a number of plans regarding bicycle routes, both through the city as well as in our adjacent unincorporated areas, and actual design on facilities within the city, bicycle facilities. Had a hand in the complete streets policy, school speed zones, downtown parking programs, as I mentioned, the Lime Bike shared micromobility pilot program you may all remember from a number of years ago, the Shalen's Multimodal Improvement Plan, the Lincoln Avenue Complete Streets pilot program, and recently Rethinking Mobility. And so I just wanted to personally thank you for your work and your service and dedication to this community. I think it's an exceptional example of civic engagement and doing your bit, as the Brits would say. So I just personally wanted to thank you for that, and of course, officially we recognize. And when the commissioner's reception ultimately is scheduled, which I would assume will be happening now sooner than later, as things seem to be easing off in the COVID realm, the city council will of course have the opportunity to do this officially for you. So thank you.
Thank you. That was very touching, and that's pretty funny about that first vote. Still, I would say that I wish things have changed more than they have. I made a note of it, the fact that I'm paying for parking because I bike today, and everybody else gets a free placard to park right here. So hopefully those incentives keep changing to be more equitable to all people, regardless of transportation type. But it's been an honor to serve here. I've worked with some wonderful people over the years, and staff, and I've learned so much, and hopefully I've given back half as much as I've learned from it. But thank you. That was very, very nice. Do you have any other comments? Not about me, but about...
I'll say thank you, Danny, right? That's 10 years, that's great. I wanted two things that I'd like to see in the future, Andy, is one, we did raise the rates on the parking fees, parking garages, and the meters, and I'd like to get an update from staff at what's been the impact of that, both for the income and on parking. And I wanted to see if we can get an update in the future on the bike scooter share and what happened. I know after Lime Bikes they had a pilot program, it left, they were looking at scooters, and then COVID hit. Just be curious to see if there's any updates from staff at a future meeting.
Actually, I could speak to one of them and partially to the second. First, speaking to the impact of the parking fee increases in the garages, actually, that was one of the things I asked Ozzy to round up for me before he left, and so I actually do have some data. I should be able to provide that back to the commission. COVID, of course, has skewed everything, but we do have some kind of, a window in time there with some information. With regard to the micromobility, the shared micromobility, so we had started working on a Pilot 2 program, but there's a number of, balancing workload had to come into play, to be honest with you, but as well as we were seeing, and so, the Rethinking Mobility effort really took precedence in the shorter term, and then we've seen some very significant changes in the industry with regard to the types of vehicles, the method, subscriptions versus single use fees, station versus stationless, et cetera, and frankly, differing interests by the industry, by the companies themselves in suburban locations such as Walnut Creek. What has actually happened more recently is the Contra Costa Transportation Authority has taken a kind of a higher coordinating role in establishing a pilot program in the county, and the San Ramon Valley area is kind of the phase one of that, and I think one of the drivers of that actually is the Bishop Ranch Business Park, and so City of San Ramon, and I believe the town of Danville as well, are in the process of setting up an initial pilot program that would be kind of phase one for then something rolling north to include Walnut Creek, and so there's, but of course then COVID came along and put the brakes on everything. I keep using these transportation analogies. I guess they're appropriate. That was something that we were expecting we might start seeing here within, say, a year. But of course, with our current, staffing situations, that would be, we wouldn't be able to undertake any new actions frankly, in the near term. But Walnut Creek, as I'm sure you're all aware, is pretty well positioned for having, potentially. It makes sense to have, at least in the downtown area and with the BART stations and the like, it does, it makes sense. And there is still interest from the public in having, kind of a first last mile shared micromobility program. And so that is something that's on our kind of our longer term radar, I will say, right at the moment. But it's definitely, it's delayed but not forgotten, is I guess how I would summarize that.
Well,
I had the same question about shared mobility,
okay, you had.
so I say, thank you.
You had the same question. It's been pretty much answered. Okay. All right. Seeing no more questions or announcements, I guess this is the final adjournment for me. Meeting adjourned.